Welcome back to the channel. Here you'll find the fastest updates on breaking news, shocking secrets, and dramatic predictions for times. The young and the restless. Who will betray whom? What secrets are about to be revealed? And what horrific tragedy awaits the characters in Genoa City? Subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us to discover the unmissable developments right now. Welcome back to our channel on this beautiful day. We are thrilled to bring you the latest, most intense updates from Genoa City. Today, we dive deep into a heartbreaking and explosive situation unfolding behind the impenetrable gates of the Newman estate, where a profound tragedy is tearing apart the very foundation of the city's most powerful family. The once vibrant and unyielding matriarch of the Newman dynasty, Nikki Newman, has descended into an abyss of absolute darkness. Following the removal of her bandages, the devastating reality of her condition has settled over her like a suffocating shroud. The world she once commanded with elegance and authority has been replaced by an endless, terrifying void of blackness. This visual deprivation is not merely a physical ailment. It has morphed into a psychological prison, stripping away her fierce independence and leaving her drowning in an ocean of vulnerability. Every waking moment is a brutal reminder of her profound loss as she navigates the disorienting emptiness of her own home, a place that now feels more like a labyrinth of unseen hazards than a sanctuary of comfort and safety. Consumed by an overwhelming fear of a future permanently devoid of light, Nikki has chosen the path of severe and uncompromising isolation. She has systematically shut out the outside world, retreating into the deepest corners of her bedroom and drawing the heavy velvet curtains tight to block out a sun she can no longer perceive. The darkness of the room has become a tragic mirror to the darkness. She vehemently refuses to allow anyone other than Victor and Victoria to cross the threshold of her self-imposed exile, turning away the desperate pleas of Nick and Claire, who stand helplessly outside her door. The once bustling Newman Ranch has been reduced to a mausoleum of whispered anxieties, with the staff tiptoeing around the crushing despair that radiates from the matriarch's chambers. This profound despair has manifested into a dangerous, self-destructive stubbornness as Nikki outright rejects any form of medical intervention or rehabilitation. The highly specialized visual therapists and renowned specialists brought in to guide her through this traumatic transition are met with locked doors and icy dismissal. Nikki perceives these rehabilitation sessions not as a beacon of hope, but as a humiliating confirmation of her permanent disability. She refuses to learn how to walk with a cane, refuses to learn how to navigate her environment blindly, and outright rejects the psychological counseling designed to help her cope with her new reality. Her refusal to adapt is a silent, agonizing surrender, a tragic white flag waved in the face of a terrifying new existence that she simply cannot find the. Outside the locked door, Victor Newman paces the hallways like a caged lion, consumed by a terrifying helplessness he has never known. The ruthless patriarch, a man who has spent his entire life bending the world to his iron will, is entirely powerless against the microscopic failure of an optic nerve. He watches in mounting horror as the love of his life actively gives up, her spirit withering away in the suffocating darkness. Victor's immense wealth, his sprawling corporate empire, and his vast network of influence are entirely useless in the face of Nikki's profound depression. His heart fractures with every rejected attempt to comfort her, his usual authoritative reassurances ringing hollow against the impenetrable wall of her absolute despair. Within the suffocating silence of her darkened room, Nikki's mind becomes a dangerous echo chamber of regret and realization. Stripped of visual distractions, her memories sharpen with agonizing clarity, specifically focusing on the months leading up to her catastrophic loss of. She traces the timeline of her physical decline, recalling the subtle early warning signs involving fleeting moments of blurred vision, inexplicable headaches, and momentary flashes of darkness that she had tried and failed to bring to her husband's attention. As she sits in the pitch black, A toxic, simmering resentment begins to take root in her soul, slowly replacing her paralyzing sorrow with a dark, terrifying. Nikki's mind meticulously pieces together the cruel reality of those crucial lost months. She remembers the exact moment she attempted to voice her concerns about her failing health, only to be entirely overshadowed by Victor's relentless, consuming obsession with his corporate wars and personal vendettas. She realizes with sickening clarity that while her world was slowly fading to black, Victor was entirely preoccupied with orchestrating his ruthless crusade against Jack Abbott, maniacally pulling the strings behind the Patty Williams disaster, and aggressively hunting down Adam and Chelsea to reclaim. Her subtle cries for help were drowned out by the deafening roar of Victor's insatiable need for dominance and revenge. This devastating realization acts as a catalyst, transforming Nikki's quiet resignation into an explosive, uncontrollable rage. She begins to view her blindness not merely as a tragic medical event, but as a direct consequence of collateral damage in Victor's endless, destructive wars. The thought that her sight could have perhaps been saved, or at least prolonged, had her husband simply paused his machinations long enough to truly look at her, becomes a burning agony in her chest. The emotional pressure cooker inside her dark sanctuary reaches a critical, unsustainable threshold, setting the stage for a confrontation that will shake the very foundations of their decades-long romance. The inevitable eruption occurs during one of Victor's desperate, misguided attempts to coax her out of her profound depression. He enters her room, his voice laced with that familiar, commanding tone of forced optimism, offering platitudes about strength and resilience while promising to find the best experimental doctors in the world. He speaks of conquering this obstacle just as they have conquered every enemy. But to Nikki, his words are not comforting. They are a grotesque reminder of the very arrogance and misplaced priorities that led her into this darkness. The gentle touch of his hand on her shoulder is the spark that finally ignites the massive powder keg of her repressed fury. In a moment of sheer, unadulterated desperation, Nikki unleashes a verbal assault of unprecedented ferocity. The fragile, broken woman vanishes, replaced by a towering inferno of righteous indignation and agonizing heartbreak. She physically recoils from his touch, her voice trembling at first, before escalating into a deafening crescendo of raw, unfiltered. She tears down the heavy silence of the room, her words slashing through the air like jagged glass. This is not a mere argument. It is a profound, visceral purging of a soul that has been pushed beyond the absolute limits of human endurance. A desperate cry from a woman who feels entirely abandoned by the man who swore to protect. Nikki mercilessly weaponizes their recent history, hurling every one of Victor's toxic obsessions directly into his face. She explicitly and brutally blames him for her condition, accusing him of willful negligence. She paints a devastating picture of a husband who was so consumed by his pathological hatred for Jack Abbott and his desperate need to control his children's corporate destinies that he remained entirely blind to his own wife's fading light. She dismantles his facade of the protective patriarch, exposing the ugly truth that his relentless pursuit of power and vengeance took precedence over her physical well-being. She accuses him of sacrificing her health on the altar of his endless petty wars. The impact of Nikki's brutal accusation strikes Victor with the force of a physical blow. The invincible, untouchable titan of industry is instantly reduced to a stunned, shattered old man. He stands frozen in the dim light of the bedroom, his breath catching in his throat as the sheer magnitude of her hatred washes over him. For the first time in his formidable life, Victor Newman is completely and utterly speechless. The agonizing truth embedded in her venomous words pierces through his legendary armor, forcing him to confront the horrifying possibility that his relentless machinations and insatiable need for control have ultimately cost his wife her vision. The aftermath of Nikki's explosive tirade leaves a suffocating, toxic silence in its wake. The emotional chasm that has ripped open between them is vast, terrifying, and seemingly unbridgeable. Nikki's chest heaves with the exertion of her rage, but rather than feeling catharsis, she is left with a hollow, freezing emptiness. She has finally spoken the unspeakable, crossing a line from which there may be no return. The profound damage inflicted by her accusations hangs heavily in the air, a permanent stain on the tapestry of their epic romance. The absolute trust that once bound them together has been incinerated in the fires of her resentment. Desperate to stop the hemorrhaging of their marriage, Victor frantically attempts to backpedal, to explain, to offer the entire world in exchange for her forgiveness. He scrambles to deploy his usual tactics of reassurance and grand gestures, promising to abandon his corporate pursuits, promising to drop his vendettas, promising to dedicate every waking second to her care. But his frantic backpedaling is met with an icy, impenetrable wall of detachment. Nikki simply turns her face away, staring blankly into the darkness, completely unresponsive to his desperate pleas. She realizes with chilling clarity that his promises are entirely empty, a reactionary panic rather than a fundamental change in his. The relationship between the great Victor and Nikki Newman now teeters precariously on the absolute edge of total annihilation. The love that has survived decades of betrayals, divorces, and tragedies is now facing its most formidable adversary, a profound, irreconcilable resentment born from irreversible physical trauma. Nikki's refusal to forgive him is not an act of mere stubbornness, but a fundamental mechanism of survival. To forgive him would mean accepting the unacceptable reality that her blindness was a preventable tragedy, a reality that would completely shatter whatever remains of her fragile self. As Victor is eventually forced to retreat from the room, entirely defeated and carrying the crushing weight of her hatred, the atmosphere in the Newman estate turns incredibly dark. The staff, the family, and the very walls of the ranch seem to hold their breath, acutely aware that a catastrophic shift has occurred. Nick and Victoria, sensing the devastating fracture between their parents, are left in a state of paralyzing anxiety, knowing that when the king and queen of Genoa City fall, the entire empire threatens to collapse with them. The foundation of the family is cracking, and the tremors are poised to send shockwaves through every corner of their lives. Left completely alone in her impenetrable darkness, the fiery adrenaline of Nikki's rage slowly ebbs away, replaced by a cold, terrifying calculation. The silence of the room presses against her eardrums as a dangerous, unprecedented thought begins to take shape in the shadows of her. If the man who promised to protect her is the very reason she is trapped in this lightless prison, then perhaps she can no longer rely on him for her salvation. As she blindly reaches out to lock the bedroom door from the inside, a chilling resolve settles over her features, leaving audiences holding their breath, absolutely terrified of the drastic, unforgivable lengths Nikki Newman might go to in order to escape the suffocating grip of her husband and the endless night of her own existence.